My name is Andrew. Welcome to my studio slash workshop. AV Music is the name of my business. And in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to refurbish a vintage Banjo-Ukulele or Banjo-Ukulele. This one is a dulcetto made in the 1930s. That's why I say it's over 100 years old. Typically, when I get something like this into my workshop, the process starts with a conversation between me and the customer. We'll take our time and go through this thing and look at all the different things that I could do to fix this and to make it look better. It's all really a question of how much is the customer prepared to spend. So there's a lot that can be done on this. We could change the drum head. These tuning pegs, for instance, these two are actually violin pegs that they put in here. They work. There's a lot of work we can do on this. But ultimately, it's up to the customer how much of that work they want me to do. Now, in this case, the customer has said that they kind of like the vintage look. They don't want me to do too much to make it look modern. It's a lot I could replace. They don't want me to replace too much. Makes my life a little easier, and it means I don't have to charge as much. So that being said, let's change the camera view and have a look at all the things that I am going to do to this. And then we'll go from there. Alrighty, let's get into this. Now, I'm going to break this down into headstock, neck, and body. Starting with the headstock. First thing I noticed when I picked this up was these tuning pegs don't match. These two are factory machine heads that would have come with the Banjo-Ukulele. These two are violin tuning pegs. Now there's some options here. We can try and carve out some new ones that look like this, would be first prize. But that's a lot of time and effort and a lot of money that the customer's not really prepared to pay. Otherwise, you could just get two new violin tuning pegs, but then, these aren't supposed to be violin tuning pegs. It's the same sort of deal. These are cone shapes, so they are friction based. You push in and turn to tune them. But still, it wouldn't fit the aesthetic, and so what we've agreed on for the customer is we're going to leave these alone, right? I'll still polish them a bit, but outside of that, we're not going to change the machine heads at all. Now, we will polish this headstock as well as the neck, of course. The metal piece here, we will hit with a bit of steel wool to try and shine it up a bit. That nut is an interesting situation. It might be difficult to source one of that size, so we're going to try and use the same nut. Not that you can't get nuts for banjo-ukuleles. Banjo-ukes are still things that are made to this day. You can still buy them brand new. But this is 100 years old. We don't know for certain that this nut is the same size as a modern one. There could be a subtle difference, and I don't want to have to start carving wider grooves and stuff. So better to just try and use this nut that we've got. In any case, it looks fine to me. It's just a bit dirty. Moving on to the neck, we will polish the metal frets a bit. There's a process. I'll demonstrate how that's done. We'll also clean the fingerboard, and then we will treat it. We'll put a little bit of oil. It's a mixture of my own recipe. We'll get that into that a lot deeper much later on in the video. With the body itself, when I looked at how this was joined onto here, I couldn't see any immediate problems. You'll notice there's a crack there. I'll get into what that means in a second. But before we do, this saddle looks fine to me. I don't see any reason to buy a new one. Not that I would want to, because the new ones you get aren't this shape. It'll do the same thing. Modern ones aren't going to change the sound really, but this one looks vintage. It looks cool, right? I'm going to try and refrain from loosening these lugs to get the skin off to clean this properly, because with something this old that hasn't been tensioned in 80 years, you don't know what kind of condition these are in. And I don't know how difficult it's going to be to source these kinds of things. As it turns out, probably not, but better to try and keep as much of the original hardware as we can. We'll still clean this metal ring, and we will hit that with a bit of steel wool. Also, we'll get into the grooves and try and get that clean. There's a process we can use to clean the drum head once the strings are off, obviously. So we'll get into that later as well. As we turn over, we see the back is metal. There's some things we can do to try to clean this up just a touch. We don't want to work with it too much. This is just standard wear and tear, which again the customer wants to keep. Gives it character. Now, moving on to the cracks. There's one there, and there is one at the back. I don't know if you can see that. And the reason is because if you look at how this thing was assembled, it's actually two halves. There's a piece of wood and a piece of wood that is, I don't know whether it's melted in place or probably just glued. It's hard to see inside there, but it's joined. It does fit almost like that, and then a piece on like that type of deal, if I'm making sense. So yeah, we will. That's something that I did say that, I mean, I can hide that if you want, but that's going to cost a lot of money because that involves wood filler and homemade wood filler, not the stuff you buy in the shops. It involves sanding, it involves painting, and painting is an art, and that takes a while. I mean, it's the same situation as where these lugs attach. I don't know if you can see, like there's a crack there, there's a crack there. All of these have got cracks, and if you can see there, it's starting to lift. There again is something where I could dig into this and try and sort it out for you, but it's going to cost a lot of money. So there again, the customer has requested just leave it alone. Because honestly, this is still under tension. It's fine. This is something that's, yeah, I'm not going to, I kind of wish I could fix that. They do make me a bit nervous. The customer's fine with it though. This was all my analysis that I did with the customer. And we talked about what I needed to do, which is what I'm going to do next. But, you know, this is a part that's very important if you're going into this kind of business, is you want to have this conversation with your customer so you both know exactly what's expected of the job. That being said, I'm going to change camera views again, because right now this camera is right in front of my face. I can't work like this. And you're going to watch me get to work on this. I might speed up the footage, put some music over it. We'll see how it goes. All right, before we get started, I want to apologize for my big ugly head getting in the way all the time. That happens a bunch of times. I really could have picked a better camera angle, and I'm sorry about that. That being said, right now I'm just removing the old strings. That's our first step. With any instrument like this, there's no rules about how you should remove one at a time or four or whatever. I just wouldn't cut them off. The sudden change in tension might cause damage. So you'll notice I'm carefully unwinding all of the strings. The other thing that I wanted to say, it can be challenging if there's tight knots. Usually I try to just use my fingers, but if that's not going to work, I will use a very thin, very small screwdriver. But you want to be careful not to create divots or scratches or anything like that. Alrighty, now that we've got the strings off, the next step is to use some steel wool to clean off our frets. Now again, my head's in the way and I'm so sorry about that. We use the finest steel wool that you can find. And I'm also being very careful, very delicate when I do this, by the way. Conventionally, the way that I was taught is you want to protect the wood of the fingerboard when you're doing this. So you can use a tool that looks kind of like a double-sided razor blade if you want. That protects the wood but lets you scrub the metal frets. Or you can tape up your fingerboard with masking tape. Either way, it'll do the trick. In this case, I'm using essentially 1 or 2 strokes per metal fret. The reason I'm not taping up, firstly, the frets themselves didn't have any rust or corrosion. It was really just a bit of dirt and grease, so it wasn't going to take much pressure at all. Also, I do plan to be using steel wool on the fingerboard anyways. Which I believe we've just done. But be delicate with this operation. Your fingerboard is a delicate thing. It's made of a soft wood. Now I'm using a toothpick around where the metal rim meets the drum head, just to scrape out that dirt. We'll clean the drum head later. There's a particular method there. But yeah, getting rid of all the gunge before we start to polish. Now we're going to use that same piece of steel wool to shine the metal plates. There's one on the headstock, which is what I'm doing now. Another reason we use steel wool is because it's very effective for polishing wood. I'm still being very careful here because I don't really want to. The wood of the headstock itself really doesn't need any sanding or polishing, so I'm being very careful not to to touch the wood. Again, if the safer method would be to tape it up. But yeah, and this also is why you want the finest steel wool that you can find. As I brush the steel wool shavings off, I should really be using a brush for this, like an old paintbrush, a nice wide one. PSA for you, be very careful with steel wool as it does leave filings. Little bits of steel wool or splinters which can end up in your fingers. I actually ended up with one in my finger during this process, which I had to clean out. Best you can do in that case is warm soapy water. Magnet is also very useful. Right now I'm using my steel wool around the rim. One thing you can notice at this angle, the way that I'm holding this steel wool matters. I've got a very narrow section that is hitting the part that I'm trying to sand. So I'm not, to be clear, I'm not holding it like a cloth, or a sponge. There's not much steel wool surface area that I'm providing with my fingers. That just makes it easier to be more delicate. Now I'm going to quickly polish the back of this. Firstly, the metal plate that's on the back there. There's a little logo, but also the metal plate itself. That metal plate, by the way, is there because it adds resonance to the instrument. It is for tone and also for volume. But yeah, there you can see putting some elbow grease in to really bring out the shine in that little badge that's attached to the back. And I think that looks pretty good to me. Now the next part is the drum head itself, and we've got to be very careful here because we don't want to get it wet. We can't really afford to use any detergents or any abrasive chemicals. So what we use is warm water, and that is a scourer, but it's a soft scourer which I'm going to soak and then wring out thoroughly. Now what actually happened here was I didn't quite wring out my scourer enough. There was a little bit too moisture. That's why you'll see me bringing the cloth later on. But all you're going to do is just apply quite a bit of elbow grease and rub in circles. Remember, this drum head is stretched, so you don't want to push too hard. And be very aware of any weak spots that you might notice. Remember, this is a banjo head, not a drum head, by which I mean a drum head is taking strikes, whereas a banjo head isn't. So, if there are any weak spots, it doesn't really matter too much or as much. But we are going to scrub and clean, and this is about the best way you can use to get any dirt off. Stains can't really do much about, of which there were quite a few. But yeah, this is about the best you can do to try and clean it up. This is one of my favorite stages here, as we're going to polish this now. And you'll notice the can of polish that I'm using isn't the stuff you'd buy in a hardware store. You don't really want to use thick polish that almost feels like wax. The stuff that comes in the red bottles or the green bottles, the thick stuff, that's furniture polish basically, is kind of what you want to stay away from. You want the stuff that you buy in the supermarkets. I don't really believe that one needs to spend a ton of money on official Fender guitar polish or Gibson guitar or Martin guitar or Taylor guitar. I don't believe brand names matter that much. Not saying the stuff isn't high quality, I'm sure it is. But the stuff that I'm using was bought in a supermarket. I will say that no matter what polish you use, I was always taught never to use it more than about once every 6 months. Otherwise, your instrument will start to lose its shine. So, and also I'm using tiny amounts. Something else you will notice, and again, it's a spray can because we want the polish to be thin. I'm spraying a tiny amount on and then scrubbing it down quite nicely. This is also getting rid of all of the dust. I did put a splash on the metal at the back just to see what it would do. And it actually worked surprisingly well. This is also definitely one of the parts of this process where you really want to take your time and try and get into all of the little crevices and gaps. This is the kind of thing that most people won't notice if it's a fantastic job, but they will notice if it's not such a great job, unfortunately. Here's an interesting part of the process when we clean our tuning pegs. Now remember, these work by friction. So you want to be very careful what kinds of chemicals you use to clean these with. You don't want to use anything abrasive. You don't want to use anything oily or greasy because there's a balance to be achieved. Violin players will actually use peg paste to make things a little tighter, to add a bit of friction. And there's things you can do to make your pegs a little smoother because they're a little too tight, for example. So there's a balance there that one doesn't want to fiddle with too much. As for what I'm doing, I'm using the dry section of that cloth. No chemicals at all. Now the next part, which might very well be my favorite part, is oiling the fingerboard. Now, that's my own special mix, my own recipe that I made because the price of fretboard oil in my home country is extortionist. I can't justify it when I can get the stuff a lot cheaper. Again, I'm so sorry about my head being in the way. The oil that you do want to use, whatever brand you go for, just make sure that it's very thin oil and that it's a synthetic oil. You don't want to use nut oils, they're too thick. Here's the key thing, right? Your fretboard or fingerboard is a very delicate thing. It's made of softwood. The idea is that we need to hydrate it without wetting it, which sounds weird, right? This is why we use very thin oil, though. So if you don't hydrate your fretboard, it will crack and warp eventually. But at the same time, if you give it moisture, you've got a problem because that can cause the same problem. So that's why we use very thin oil. It's a recipe I devised. I do add a little bit of lemongrass oil to mine, just a touch, just to give it a good smell. And then you'll notice I put some oil on the back piece of metal just to give it a little bit of extra shine. And then any excess oil, which really there isn't much left at all, I'm using just to shine the rest of the instruments just to make it look nice. The other thing is be very careful with the amount of oil that you put onto your fretboard. You don't want much at all. I dab a couple of drops on the cloth and then I rub it on. And then I used to shake out my cloth and then take the dry part of the cloth and wipe off the excess oil. You want a very little amount. The reason you want such thin oil is because there's a term for it which I'm blanking on. It will evaporate really quickly. Is basically what it boils down to. And then giving it one last wipe with the cloth, and having done that, look at how beautiful that looks. This instrument is now ready for its strings, which I forgot to actually film, so we'll cut to me explaining exactly how that works in just a moment. Alright, like an idiot, I forgot to hit record. I've already got these strings on. This isn't tuned yet. I'll do that in a second for you guys, and the intonations and sets. These saddles can move around, so I'll show you how that works in a minute also. But first I want to show you how I tie these strings. I'm going to use this just as an example, because you'll notice these hooks are tiny, right? I mean, how do you get a string to catch on there? Especially these thicker ones can be difficult. These haven't stretched in properly yet, you can see. But in any case, I start with something round like a pen or a pencil. I'm using a paintbrush here. And this is for the hooks on the right side. I'll talk about the tuning pegs in a second. I'm going to wrap my string around like that. This is how I was taught, all right? Give yourself a decent amount of excess room. I'm going to cross over, and then I'm going to twist once, twice, okay? And then this end here goes through the hoop, right? Then you pull, and now you can sort of see what we've got. So I hope you can see that, what the knot, because if I pull this off, I'm going to hold this in. You can see what the knot sort of looks like. That's what you end up with, all right? And then that end there, that hole goes onto your hook. Essentially where the paintbrush was is where it goes on, and you just yank it tight. So I'll show you a second time. I was taught to put it around, cross over, twist, wow, shucks, once, twice, take this end, push it through, grab there, because you want to grab it so that this piece doesn't fall out, pull that through, and then this would end up hooked on there. In fact, this is a spare one, so we'll just show you what it would look like. Let's say that's our guitar, or our uke. This is for ukuleles and for banjo-ukeles. And then you just yank. And the point being now is that I can do this, and as I pull, it's going to tighten it. But here's the cool thing. If I want to take it off, all I do is I break the knots, and you can pull it off. So it makes changing these things easier also. But it does make for a nice tight knot. That's the knot I was taught. On this side of things, on the tuning peg side, the way I was taught was you push the string through the hole, use a straighter edge, you push it through the hole, twist it around, push it back through the same hole. Just make sure you're turning it that way. So try and make sure that it lines up nicely. Right? So in other words, I'm going to push it through so that it looks kind of like that as I'm tightening. You don't want it that way while you're tightening, otherwise you're working against yourself, kind of a thing. So, and then you just tighten up. So that having been said, let's tune this thing and set intonation. Now I know what you're thinking. This is not the banjo-ukulele we've been working on, and you're absolutely right. This is my banjo-ukulele. The one that we were working on, like an idiot, I forgot to film the tuning and intonation process. So I'm going to demo that for you right now using my one. This gives us a nice opportunity because the one we were working on had a metal back. It was about 100 years old. This one's only about 30 years old, and it has a wood back, right? And you're going to get to hear the difference between those two at the end of this clip. Now, this whole process begins with placement of our saddle, which we always put slightly off center. Remember, this can move that way or that way. In terms of this way, we want it slightly off center towards the back. So I'm going to say sort of 3/5 of the way closer to there. And then we put our strings on, and we don't tension them yet. We just tighten them enough that the bridge is held in place. I'm then going to get down. I like to get down quite low and position it that away. The gap between that string and the end, and that string and the end, we want to make those gaps as close to the same as we possibly can get them. We're not measuring this. It doesn't have to be perfectly exact, but close enough. Now what we do is tune up, which brings up the good question of what are we tuning these things to? What notes do we tune these strings to? And quite simply, G, C, E, and A, which incidentally notes that this is not the lowest pitch, as you might think, because of any guitar you play or violin or anything like that. It's not even the highest. If you wanted to play this in pitch order, 3, 2, 4, 1. That's actually how you would play it. So just don't forget that this is a higher pitch string. Okay? Be careful when you're tuning, when you're stringing this also. This is quite a thin string. You'd be forgiven for thinking it goes at the end. It doesn't. It actually goes on top. Anyways, once you're tuned up, because you're going to want to do that with all 4 strings, this is all ready tuned up, by the way, because this is an absolute nightmare to tune. These are not friction-based pegs. They have little screws in them. So, yeah, it's horrible. So I've tuned these up. Once you have tuned up, you're now going to use your 4th fret as a guide to see whether it is intonated. The reason being, the 12th fret is right in the middle between bridge and nuts. The idea is we're trying to make sure that the middle of the string lies on the 12th fret, right? So you just pluck, get green, get green. Okay, that isn't green, but you know what I'm saying. For the purposes of this video, right? And if it was off, you'd adjust this accordingly to make it work. Now, quick thing, we don't need to worry about the 2 middle strings, right? Because we can't adjust them anyways. This bridge can either be adjusted like that, or it can be angled like that, meaning we've got control over these 2 separate strings, but not the 2 middle ones. So once these 2 are intonated properly, fortunately the way these things are designed, automatically the middle 2 should be fine. If they're not, you're probably going to need to get a new bridge or new nuts. Now, Question being, which way do we move this? Well, because we're trying to get the middle point, if this was too high, what does that tell us? Let's think about this logically. That tells us that our midpoint is actually over there somewhere. It's supposed to be there, but it's sitting over there somewhere, right? It's like moved up a bit. So we need to move this bridge up to adjust. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if it was flat, that tells me that my midpoint's actually over there somewhere, so we're going to move it like that. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. That's the way I remember which way to adjust these things. Anyways, that's how you tune, that's how you set intonation with these kinds of floating bridges. And I'm going to play this for you really quickly, and then we will cut to me playing the older Banjo-Ukulele, and you'll get to hear the difference. So, spoiler, this one doesn't sound nearly as bright, and it's not nearly as loud as the older Banjo-Ukulele. That's why I prefer a metal back to a wood back.